the happy woman he chose to save, not control. The sun was just beginning to rise over the jagged desert hills, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. A lone rancher rode slowly along a narrow trail, the hooves of his horse crunching against the dry, rocky ground. His name was Thomas, a man used to living with the harshness of the land, accustomed to long days under the sun and nights alone with only the stars for company. The ranch he managed stretched for miles, a vast stretch of arid earth dotted with scrub and sagebrush, and he knew every corner of it. Yet, even with all his familiarity, the desert could surprise him, and today would be no different. As he guided his horse along a dry wash, a movement in the distance caught his eye. At first he thought it might be a coyote or a stray deer, but as he came closer he saw the figure of a young woman. She was thin, her clothes torn and dusty, and she moved with careful, unsteady steps. Her dark hair was tangled, and her face, though beautiful, was pale and marked by exhaustion. Thomas slowed his horse instinctively, sensing something urgent. There was a fragility about her, a vulnerability that spoke louder than words. He felt a sudden pull in his chest, a mix of concern and responsibility. She was alone, and she needed help. "Bee," he called out gently, making sure not to startle her. "Are you all right?" His voice was calm, steady, carrying across the empty space between them. She flinched at first, but did not run. Instead, she lowered her head slightly, a gesture that suggested caution and wariness. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, wide and wary, filled with fear and exhaustion. Thomas noticed the way she tried to stand taller, trying to appear strong despite her weakness. He could see the bruises on her arms and the dirt smudged across her face. Clearly she had endured more than any young woman should. Thomas dismounted and approached her slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "You look hurt. Let me help you." She hesitated, glancing at the horizon as if expecting someone else to appear. Perhaps she had been abandoned before, left alone in the desert with only her courage to keep her alive. The rancher understood. He had heard stories from travelers and from nearby settlers about the dangers that lingered in these lands. Raiders, wild animals, and the cruelty of circumstance. He did not want to scare her. He wanted to give her a choice, to offer safety without forcing it. Slowly she stepped closer, allowing him to see the depth of her injuries. Her ankle twisted awkwardly with each step, and her hands were scraped and bleeding. Thomas took out a small canteen of water and handed it to her. She hesitated, then drank carefully, her hands trembling. He watched her, noticing the way her chest rose and fell, the sharp intake of breath that came from pain and relief. It was a small, simple act, but in that moment, trust began to form, fragile and delicate. "I can take you somewhere safe," Thomas said. "There's a place I can get you cleaned up, fed, and out of danger." She nodded slightly, not speaking, but her eyes softened. He understood that for someone who had been abandoned and hurt, words were not always enough. Actions mattered more. He gestured toward his horse and offered her a hand. She took it, gripping him with surprising strength, and he helped her climb onto the horse behind him. She held on, her body trembling, not just from her injuries, but from the uncertainty of the journey ahead. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, save for the creaking of the saddle and the soft wind through the desert brush. Thomas let her set the pace, not pushing the horse too fast. He felt her tense against him at times, and he spoke softly, offering comfort without intrusion. He told her stories about the ranch, not about himself, but about the land, the animals, and the simple rhythms of life that sustained him. She listened, sometimes speaking only a word or two, but gradually her shoulders relaxed, and her breathing became steadier. It was a slow, careful process, building trust one small moment at a time. When they arrived at the ranch, Thomas led the horse to the stable and helped her dismount. He had prepared a small room for her, a simple space with a bed, blankets, and a wash basin. He gave her space to settle, insisting only that she rest and drink more water. She sat quietly, her dark eyes scanning the room, still cautious, but beginning to understand that she was not being forced into anything. The rancher understood that freedom was as important as safety. Basque. He did not see her as someone to control or command, but as a person who had endured much and deserved choice. As the day progressed, Thomas tended to her injuries with care. He cleaned the scrapes and bruises, applied salves, and wrapped bandages with gentle hands. She flinched at first, but he moved slowly and explained each step, asking her permission before touching any sore spot. She began to relax, the tension in her body easing just a little. Meals were brought to her, simple and nourishing, and she ate quietly, appreciating the warmth of food without being rushed or pressured. In those moments, Thomas observed her strength, the way she endured, the way she remained alert and wary, but also the way she allowed herself to accept help.
Evening fell, and the desert sky turned a deep shade of purple.
Stars began to twinkle, distant and bright, and the wind carried the coolness of the approaching night. Thomas lit a small fire outside and invited her to sit by it. She hesitated, but eventually joined him, sitting a little apart at first, then closer as the fire warmed the chill from her bones. They shared stories, not of themselves in detail, but of the land and the seasons, of the animals and the work that kept the ranch alive. There was no pressure, no expectation. It was a moment of peace, a brief respite from the harsh world outside. By the time she lay down to sleep that night, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Safety. Not control, not ownership, but true protection. She had a choice, and that choice was respected. The rancher had offered her a lifeline, but he had done so without demanding anything in return. It was a rare thing in a world so often harsh and cruel. And in that simple act, trust began to grow. A trust that would take time, patience, and shared experiences to fully develop. Thomas sat by the door of her room for a while, watching the shadows of the night stretch across the floor. Bell. He thought about the path that had led him here, about the choices people made and the consequences they faced. He did not see her as a project or as someone to change. He saw her as a human being who had survived against the odds, someone deserving of respect and care. And he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he could offer her that, nothing more, nothing less. The first part of their story was simple, almost unremarkable on the surface. A man found a woman in danger, helped her, and gave her space to recover. But beneath that simplicity lay the beginnings of something profound. A bond forged not in power or control, but in respect, trust, and shared humanity. It was a foundation that would carry them through the challenges ahead, through danger, prejudice, and the harshness of the land itself. For now, though, there was only the quiet of the night, the soft rustle of wind, and the knowledge that she was safe, for the first time in a long while. In the morning, she would wake to a world that still held uncertainty. The desert was unforgiving, and life on the ranch would be different from anything she had known. But she would also wake to the knowledge that she had choice, that she could move at her own pace, and that the man who had saved her did not seek to control her. That knowledge was precious, more valuable than food or shelter. It was the start of something new, fragile yet strong, a promise that her life could be hers to live, with guidance and support, not domination. And that promise would shape the days, weeks, and months to come, laying the groundwork for a story defined by resilience, respect, and the quiet strength of two people who had chosen to help one another simply because it was the right thing to do. The sun rose again over the wide expanse of the desert, casting a golden glow on the rugged land. The rancher, Thomas, had already begun his morning routines, checking fences, watering troughs, and tending the livestock. The Apache woman, whose name was Nayeli, watched from a distance at first, taking in the rhythm of the ranch and the life that moved steadily through it. She had grown used to isolation, but now she found herself in a world where every sound and movement carried meaning. The wind, the rustling of the cattle, the low whinny of horses, all became part of her new understanding of this place. Thomas noticed her hesitation and approached slowly, giving her the space she needed to acclimate. "Come on," he said softly. "You can help me with the water. It's not hard, and it will keep your hands busy."
Eh!
Nayeli nodded, stepping forward with a careful grace, her movements still wary from days of pain and exhaustion.
She lifted buckets, filled the troughs, and learned the ways the ranch worked.
Each small task gave her confidence. She was not forced to do anything, yet Thomas's gentle guidance encouraged her to take part in this life. For the first time in a long time, she felt useful, her actions contributing to something larger than herself. The days settled into a routine. Thomas rose early to work the ranch. Nayeli followed, slowly learning not just the physical tasks, but also the understanding that she had a choice in everything she did.
He never ordered her, never imposed rules beyond simple safety.
Bess. If she wanted to rest, she could. If she wanted to learn how to ride the horses or repair a fence, he would teach her patiently. The days were filled with small lessons. How to mend torn saddles, how to track the cattle across the dry terrain, how to read the clouds and the wind.
Nayeli began to see the rhythms of this land as a language, a way to survive and thrive.
One morning, while tending to the corral, Nayeli slipped on the dusty ground and fell. Thomas was immediately there, steadying her with a hand. "Be careful," he said quietly, his eyes meeting hers with concern. She smiled weakly, brushing the dust from her clothes. "I will be fine," she said. She was learning not just the physical aspects of ranch life, but also how to regain confidence in herself. Thomas nodded, not insisting she take a break, but allowing her to decide when to continue. He understood that true care meant respecting her strength, not undermining it. As the weeks passed, Nayeli began to open up more. She shared small stories of her life before the raid, of her family, the traditions she cherished, and the lessons she had learned growing up in her community. Thomas listened without interruption, never judging, never questioning her choices. In return, he shared simple stories of the ranch, his life under the sun, and the hardships of maintaining the land. They spoke at the fire in the evenings, their voices mingling with the soft sounds of the desert night. Though they came from very different worlds, a mutual respect was forming, a bond built on understanding rather than possession. Yet the peace of the ranch was not without its challenges. Other settlers and ranchers began to notice Nayeli's presence. Some whispered behind Thomas's back, questioning why he would allow an outsider, especially a young Apache woman, into his life and onto his land. Their questions carried suspicion and judgment. Thomas felt the weight of these opinions, but never allowed them to interfere with the way he treated Nayeli. He refused to see her as someone to control, knowing that the strength of trust was far more powerful than the approval of others. Nayeli, for her part, felt the tension but trusted Thomas's intentions best. She had chosen to accept his help, and she would not allow the fear of others to diminish her newfound sense of safety. One day, as Thomas and Nayeli worked together repairing a fence on the far edge of the property, a group of men rode past, their faces stern and eyes filled with suspicion. One of them shouted a comment meant to provoke questioning why Thomas had taken in a woman who did not belong to him. Thomas stopped working and calmly addressed them. "She is here because she chose to be safe. Nothing more. She has her own life, and I respect it." The man muttered and rode off, but the words lingered. Nayeli felt a quiet pride at Thomas's defense. She was not just a passive participant. She was seen as someone with her own voice, her own choices. That moment reinforced her sense of agency, a feeling she had almost forgotten in the struggles she had endured. Despite the external pressures, the ranch began to feel like a place of stability for Nayeli. She learned to cook meals over the fire, tending to simple dishes that were nourishing and comforting. She learned to ride the horses more confidently, the wind rushing past her as she guided them across open land. She began to help with the cattle drives, her eyes sharp and her movements precise. With each task completed, she felt more capable, more independent. Bright. Thomas continued to support her without interference, celebrating her accomplishments with quiet encouragement. There was no command, no hierarchy imposed, only shared effort and mutual respect. Evenings became a time of reflection and quiet companionship. They would sit by the fire, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply watching the stars. Nayeli began to understand that safety and freedom could coexist, that she could accept care without sacrificing her independence. Thomas never asked for her gratitude or obedience. Instead, he allowed her the dignity of choice. She realized that this was a rare kind of trust, one built on patience and understanding, not on fear or obligation. She was learning to trust again, not just him, but herself, and the ability to make decisions without the weight of past trauma holding her down. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the desert. The sky darkened, and strong winds whipped sand and dust across the land. Thomas and Nayeli worked together to secure the livestock and tie down loose equipment. The storm was a test, a reminder of the unpredictability of life in the desert. They moved efficiently, side by side, communicating with quiet gestures and brief words. Nayeli realized that she was not just surviving but thriving. She was learning resilience, learning that she could face challenges and make choices even under pressure. Thomas offered guidance, not control, letting her take the lead in some tasks, while stepping in only when safety demanded it. As the storm passed, a rainbow stretched across the sky, its colors vivid against the dark clouds. Nayeli paused to admire it, feeling a strange mix of awe and gratitude. It was a small but meaningful moment, a symbol of hope and renewal. Thomas stood beside her, sharing the quiet beauty without words, recognizing that sometimes presence alone was the strongest support. In that moment, Nayeli felt the depth of the connection forming between them. It was not based on possession or obligation, but on respect, trust, and shared experience. It was the kind of bond that could survive the harshest conditions, one built on equality and choice. Over time, Nayeli began to contribute more to life on the ranch in ways she chose herself. She planted a small garden, cultivating herbs and vegetables that she cared for with patience and pride. She repaired sections of the barn with Thomas's guidance, learning the techniques and problem-solving skills that came with hands-on experience. Each day she became more confident, more self-reliant, and yet more connected to Thomas as a partner in this shared life. Their relationship was evolving, marked by mutual respect and understanding rather than control or expectation. By the end of the second month, Nayeli had transformed not just physically but emotionally. The fear and caution that had once defined her days were replaced with measured confidence. She knew she could survive on her own, but she also recognized the value of the partnership that had formed with Thomas.
He had saved her from danger, but more importantly, he had honored her autonomy, treating her as an equal in every way that mattered. She felt safe, respected, and empowered, a combination she had almost forgotten existed.
As the sun set over the ranch one quiet evening, Nayeli and Thomas sat together, listening to the distant calls of the cattle and the rustling of the wind through the desert brush.
There was a comfort in the silence, a deep sense of connection without words.
Nayeli realized that her life had changed, not because someone had controlled it, but because someone had chosen to protect her while giving her the freedom to make her own choices. She understood that strength and care could coexist, that independence and trust were not opposites but complementary forces. In that moment she felt a quiet pride in herself and a growing respect for Thomas, who had shown her that true protection was not control, but choice. The days that followed continued in the same rhythm. Work, learning, quiet reflection, and shared moments by the fire. Nayeli's confidence continued to grow, and Thomas remained patient and supportive, never imposing rules beyond what was necessary for safety. Together they faced small challenges and celebrated small victories, reinforcing the bond that had begun when he first found her in the desert. This partnership, built on respect and choice, became a foundation for what was yet to come. It was a life slowly being reclaimed, a story of survival, trust, and quiet triumph. Days turned into weeks, and the desert continued its unchanging rhythm. Nayeli had grown more comfortable on the ranch, but she still carried the quiet weight of her past. Even in moments of calm, shadows of the raid and the long journey to safety lingered in her thoughts. Thomas noticed these moments, the brief pauses when her gaze drifted to the distant hills or when she flinched at a sudden sound.
He never asked her to speak before she was ready, never pressured her to forget.
He understood that healing took time, that trust could not be rushed. One morning, as the sun climbed slowly over the horizon, Thomas and Nayeli prepared for a trip to the far pasture to check on the herd. The wind was mild, carrying the earthy scent of sagebrush and dry soil. As they rode, Nayeli rode with more confidence now, guiding her horse with steady hands. Thomas observed her quietly, feeling a sense of pride at how far she had come. Yet he also sensed the lingering tension within her. She had survived terrible hardships, and some part of her remained on guard, always alert for danger. As they neared the far pasture, a distant cloud of dust caught their attention. Thomas tightened his grip on the reins and slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. The dust was moving quickly, and he knew immediately that it was not just the wind or a herd of wild animals. He motioned for Nayeli to stay close.
As they drew nearer, a group of men emerged from the distance.
Bear. Their expressions were hard, eyes wary, and Thomas could sense the threat in their approach. They were settlers from a nearby town, some known for their suspicion and prejudice against outsiders. One of the men shouted, questioning Thomas's actions.
Why do you bring her here?
She doesn't belong to you. Thomas kept his voice calm, steady, and firm. She is here because she chose to be safe, nothing more. Base. I respect her choices, and she is free to go whenever she wants. The man's face twisted in anger, but Thomas did not back down. Bay. Nayeli felt her heart race, but she did not panic. She had learned that Thomas's protection was not control. She had the right to make her own choices even in moments of fear. The men muttered among themselves, some expressing doubt, others annoyance, but none of them dared to challenge Thomas further. Slowly, they rode away, leaving Thomas and Nayeli in the quiet desert once more. Nayeli exhaled, the tension in her chest easing. Best. She realized how fortunate she was to have someone who defended her freedom as much as her safety. It was a lesson she carried silently, a reminder that strength could be gentle and protection could coexist with respect.
Later that day, they worked together to mend broken fences damaged by the storm the previous week.
Thomas taught Nayeli how to knot ropes tightly, how to check for weak posts, and how to repair the sections that held the herd. She listened carefully, repeating his instructions, learning not only the skills but also the patience required to do the work properly. Each fence they repaired together became a small victory, a symbol of their shared effort and growing partnership. It was more than just work. It was a test of trust, cooperation, and mutual respect. Pay. The following weeks brought both challenges and small triumphs. Nayeli helped tend the cattle, learning to read the movements of the herd, noticing which animals were sick or weak, and assisting in guiding them to safe grazing areas. Thomas allowed her to make decisions, offering guidance only when necessary. She began to trust her own instincts, discovering an inner strength she had not known she possessed. Each day, she became more confident, more capable, and more certain that her life could belong to her once again.
One evening, while preparing dinner over the fire, Nayeli spoke quietly of her past.
She described her family, the home she had lost, and the long journey through fear and uncertainty. Thomas listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. He understood that sharing memories of pain could be healing, and that listening without offering solutions sometimes mattered more than action. Nayeli felt a weight lift from her chest, the simple act of being heard reinforcing the bond between them. Bess. She realized that trust was growing, not just in Thomas, but in herself.
But life on the ranch was not only about calm routines.
Bay. One morning, a stray herd of cattle wandered onto the property from a neighboring ranch. They had escaped due to a broken fence, and the herd was large and unruly. Thomas and Nayeli quickly prepared to guide the animals back, their movements coordinated and efficient. Nayeli took the lead in some areas, directing the cattle with firm but gentle commands. Thomas watched her, impressed by her skill and determination. The situation required courage and quick thinking, and she rose to the challenge with calm focus. It was a test, and she passed with confidence. As they worked, a sudden injury occurred. One of the cattle stumbled, twisting its leg painfully. Nayeli immediately noticed the animal's distress and called for Thomas's help. Together, they managed to stabilize the animal, carefully guiding it to a safer area while minimizing its pain. The incident reinforced Nayeli's sense of responsibility and capability. She was not just surviving. She was contributing meaningfully, learning that her choices and actions had real impact. Thomas smiled quietly, proud not because he controlled her, but because she had grown into someone capable, resilient, and independent.
At night, as they sat by the fire, Thomas shared a story about his own past.
He spoke of hardships he had faced on the ranch, of nights alone under the stars, and of lessons learned the hard way. Nayeli listened, absorbing the story, but also noticing the subtle ways he encouraged reflection rather than direction. He never imposed, never demanded. He simply shared, allowing her to draw her own lessons, to form her own understanding of life and strength. It was a different kind of teaching, one rooted in respect and choice, and it left a lasting impression. The community around the ranch continued to observe Nayeli and Thomas, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with judgment. Rumors circulated about why she was there, about her past, and about the nature of their relationship. Nayeli felt the sting of whispers at first, but she quickly learned that Thomas's trust and respect were far more important than the opinions of others. She found strength in knowing that her life was hers to live, and that the man who had saved her valued her agency above all else. The judgments of the community could not define her, and for the first time she felt a sense of ownership over her choices. Then, one afternoon, as they were surveying the farthest corner of the ranch, Nayeli spotted movement near a distant cliff. She squinted, recognizing the silhouette of a man from her past. Someone she had feared would never let her live in peace. Memories of the raid and the hardships she had endured surged back, and her heart began to race. Thomas noticed her sudden tension and asked gently, "What is it?" She pointed, her voice trembling slightly. "But he shouldn't be here." Thomas nodded, understanding immediately the threat, but also recognizing the importance of her autonomy. He did not take control or act without her consent. Instead, he asked, "What do you want to do?" Nayeli thought for a moment, weighing her fear against her growing confidence. Then she spoke with determination. "We'll handle this together, but I will decide how." Nayeli realized that her life was no longer dictated by fear or circumstance. She had regained the power to make choices, even in moments of danger. Thomas's respect for her decisions, his refusal to control her, gave her strength she had not known she possessed. Together they approached the situation cautiously. planning their actions based on mutual understanding and careful strategy. It was a challenge that tested not just their courage but the foundation of trust they had built over weeks of shared life. The encounter with the past brought tension and fear, but it also highlighted the transformation Naeli had undergone. Despapan. She was no longer the frightened, abandoned woman Thomas had first found in the desert. She had grown into someone capable of facing danger, making decisions and taking action with clarity and purpose. Thomas recognized this change not as a shift in power but as a natural evolution of trust and respect. Their bond had deepened, strengthened by trials, challenges, and shared triumphs. By the time they returned to the safety of the ranch that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert bathed in soft twilight. Naeli felt a quiet sense of pride and relief. She had faced a threat from her past, navigated challenges in the present, and done so with her own agency intact. Thomas stood beside her, offering silent support, acknowledging her strength without overshadowing it. The fire crackled, and the stars began to appear distant and steady. In that calm, reflective moment, Naeli understood something vital. True protection did not require control, and true strength came from the freedom to choose one's path.
The days ahead would bring more challenges, more moments that tested patience, courage, and trust.
But for now, Naeli and Thomas had proven to themselves that they could face adversity together without surrendering autonomy. Their story was no longer only about survival. It was about resilience, respect, and the quiet power of partnership built on choice. And as the desert night stretched over the land, both of them understood that this was only the beginning of a journey that would shape not just their days but their lives forever. The morning sun bathed the ranch in warm golden light, but the calm that usually came with the dawn was tinged with tension. Naeli and Thomas had faced their first true threat together, and though they had emerged safely, the encounter left its mark. The distant memory of the man from her past lingered like a shadow, a reminder that danger could appear without warning.
Naeli, however, felt stronger than she ever had.
She had faced fear before, and this time she had not been alone. Thomas had not taken control. He had stood by her, supporting her while letting her lead. That support had given her courage and reinforced the trust that had been quietly growing between them. The ranch felt different now, as if every corner held new meaning. The fences they had repaired together, the animals they tended, and even the small garden Naeli had planted became symbols of her growing agency. Each task she completed reminded her that she was capable, that her choices mattered, and that her life was slowly returning to her. Thomas watched her quietly, never boasting about her progress or claiming credit. He understood that true care was not about praise or authority, but about respect and support. Naeli noticed this, and it made her feel valued in a way she had never experienced before.
That day, Thomas suggested they focus on repairing the barn roof, which had been damaged by a recent windstorm.
Naeli hesitated at first, looking up at the towering structure, the wooden beams weathered and worn.
"I can't do that," she whispered, doubt in her voice.
Thomas shook his head gently. "You can. I'll be here to guide you, but you will be the one holding the ropes, making the decisions. You are capable." Naeli took a deep breath and climbed onto the platform, gripping the ropes with steady hands. Each movement required balance and strength, and each time she paused to think before acting, she realized how far she had come. She was no longer just following instructions. She was choosing how to act, and each choice reinforced her independence.
As they worked together, the bond between them deepened.
Thomas offered guidance without command, suggestions without pressure. Naeli found herself smiling despite the strenuous labor, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride. For the first time in years, she realized that she could not only survive but thrive in this world, given the right support and freedom. The work was difficult, the sun harsh, and the wind unpredictable, But each challenge became an opportunity to prove to herself that she was strong, capable, and resilient. After the barn was secured, they turned their attention to the cattle. Some had wandered into rough terrain, tangled among thorny brush and uneven ground. Nayeli took the lead in guiding the herd, moving with confidence and calm authority. Thomas followed closely, watching her handle the animals with patience and care. The cattle responded to her voice, her gentle but firm commands guiding them safely back to the pen. Best. Nayeli felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had contributed meaningfully, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Thomas did not interfere unless safety required it, and in doing so he reinforced the lesson that her agency mattered most. But evening brought another quiet moment by the fire. Nayeli had grown more comfortable sharing her thoughts and memories, and this night was no different. She spoke softly of her family, of the traditions she remembered, and of the life she had lost. Thomas listened attentively, never interrupting, never judging. He understood that hearing her story was part of her healing, that she needed space to process the past while finding strength in the present. She felt heard, understood, and valued, and that sense of respect reinforced her confidence and independence. The next challenge arrived unexpectedly. A severe storm rolled in from the mountains, dark clouds swallowing the sky and winds whipping across the desert plains. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, and lightning split the horizon. Thomas and Nayeli moved quickly, securing the livestock, tying down equipment, and preparing the ranch for the worst. Nayeli took initiative, directing the tasks with calm authority, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Thomas followed her lead when appropriate, intervening only when safety demanded. She realized that she was no longer a passive participant in life. She was a capable partner, making decisions, facing challenges, and taking responsibility for the outcome. The storm raged through the night, and when morning came, the ranch bore the marks of its fury. Fallen branches, mud-soaked fields, and scattered animals created a scene of destruction. Nayeli and Thomas worked together to assess the damage fast. Nayeli immediately took stock of the situation, prioritizing tasks and offering solutions. She had learned not just to survive, but to organize, lead, and problem-solve. Thomas admired her focus and determination, proud not because he had guided her, but because he had supported her growth. Their partnership had evolved from protection to equality, each of them contributing their skills and knowledge to navigate life's challenges. In the days that followed, their bond deepened further. They shared stories and laughter, celebrated small victories, and faced minor setbacks with patience and resilience. Nayeli began to explore more of the land, discovering hidden valleys, rocky outcrops, and streams that offered fresh water. She learned to read the signs of the desert, understanding the patterns of wildlife and weather. Each discovery reinforced her sense of independence and competence. Thomas encouraged her curiosity, joining her on explorations but allowing her to lead. He understood that true protection meant letting her experience the world while providing support when necessary. Then came the unexpected visit from a traveler who brought news of an approaching group of bandits who had been raiding nearby settlements. The traveler warned that they were moving toward the area, and Thomas and Nayeli realized they would need to prepare. Nayeli did not panic. Instead, she helped Thomas strategize, thinking through potential risks, escape routes, and methods to protect the ranch. Her input was thoughtful and deliberate, showing a level of confidence and intelligence that Thomas had come to respect deeply. She was no longer the frightened woman he had rescued. She was an equal partner in facing danger. Together, they reinforced the fences, secured the livestock, and prepared safe spaces within the ranch in case of intrusion. Nayeli moved with purpose, her mind focused and her actions deliberate. She had learned to balance caution with initiative, instinct with planning. Thomas observed her carefully, offering support without controlling her, letting her make decisions and act on them. The preparation was exhausting, but it strengthened their bond, revealing the depth of trust and respect that had grown between them. Night fell once more, and the stars glittered above, indifferent to the challenges below. Nayeli and Thomas sat together quietly, reflecting on the events of the past days. But Nayeli felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and potential danger, and she had done so with her own choices intact. Thomas, too, felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had protected her without taking control, guided her without imposing, and supported her growth without overshadowing it. Their relationship was no longer defined by rescue or survival alone. It was a partnership, grounded in equality, trust, and mutual respect. In the following weeks, the anticipated threat did not materialize, but the preparation itself became a testament to their growth. Nayeli's confidence soared, and Thomas continued to support her, offering guidance when necessary but never domination. They worked side by side, tending the ranch, exploring the land, and sharing moments of quiet reflection. Each day reinforced the lessons of autonomy, respect, and resilience. Nayeli realized that she had not only survived her past but had reclaimed her ability to shape her own future. By the end of this period, the ranch had become a place of safety and growth. Nayeli had regained her strength, her confidence, and her independence. Thomas had shown her that protection need not mean control, that trust and support could coexist with freedom and choice. Their bond had been tested by fear, challenge, and external pressures, and it had emerged stronger, resilient, and enduring. They had learned that true partnership was built not on dominance, but on equality, understanding, and respect. As the sun set over the desert once again, casting long shadows across the land, Nayeli and Thomas stood together, surveying the ranch and the work they had accomplished. She felt a quiet sense of pride and gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she knew that her life was truly her own, guided by her choices and strengthened by the support of someone who understood the value of autonomy. Thomas felt the same quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had offered protection without control, guidance without dominance, and respect without expectation. Best. In that moment, both understood that the challenges of life would continue, that dangers and uncertainties still existed, but they also understood that they were stronger together. Their bond had grown beyond rescue, beyond survival, into something deeper. A partnership defined by trust, respect, and the quiet power of shared resilience. And as the night sky stretched above them, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it as equals, guided by choice, courage, and the unwavering trust that had carried them through the trials so far. The desert was quiet that morning, the sun casting soft golden light across the rugged landscape. Thomas and Nayeli had worked together for months now, building a life on the ranch that balanced strength, freedom, and mutual respect. The challenges they had faced, storms, lost cattle, and the lingering shadows of her past had all brought them closer, but they had never compromised the trust that defined their partnership. Nayeli now moved through the ranch with confidence, her hands steady and her mind clear, knowing that her choices mattered and that her voice was valued. This morning, Nayeli walked to the small garden she had planted, checking the herbs and vegetables that had begun to flourish. Each plant was a symbol of her growth, a reminder that care, patience, and attention could create something strong and lasting. She smiled softly as she touched the leaves, feeling pride in her work. Thomas joined her, carrying a small bucket of water to help tend the garden. He did not offer commands or instructions. Instead, he simply followed her lead, allowing her to decide which plants needed attention and how to care for them. Their companionship had evolved into harmony, a rhythm built on respect and equality. But as they worked, Thomas noticed how far Nayeli had come. She no longer flinched at sudden movements or tense moments. Her eyes held calm determination, her movements deliberate and confident. She had grown not only in strength but in spirit, reclaiming the parts of herself that had been lost during the raid and her long journey to safety. Thomas felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had offered her support without control, protection without dominance. The trust they had built was evident in every action, every glance, and every shared moment. Later, they rode together to inspect the farthest pastures, the desert wind carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. Nayeli led the way, guiding the horses with a steady hand, her voice clear and commanding when needed. Thomas followed, his presence reassuring but unobtrusive. They moved in sync, a partnership forged through months of shared work, challenges, and quiet victories. The land stretched endlessly before them, but the journey felt safe and purposeful. Nayeli's confidence in herself was reflected in the way she handled the animals, navigated the rough terrain, and responded calmly to unexpected situations. One afternoon, as they returned to the ranch, Nayeli paused to watch a young foal struggling to stand in the corral. She knelt beside it, speaking softly and gently, guiding it to its feet. Thomas watched, quietly impressed, as she patiently encouraged the animal, using care rather than force. The foal finally rose, unsteady but determined, and Nayeli's face lit with satisfaction.
It needed patience, she said, turning to Thomas.
Sometimes strength isn't about power, it's about guidance. Thomas nodded, understanding the deeper lesson, not just for the animal but for their lives as well. Evenings at the ranch had become a time of reflection and quiet connection. They would sit by the fire sharing stories, laughter, and moments of silence. Nayeli spoke more freely now, sharing hopes and dreams she had kept hidden for years. She talked about the life she wanted to build, not just on the ranch but for herself, guided by her own choices and ambitions. Thomas listened, offering support and encouragement, never imposing his own expectations. Their relationship had grown into one of equality, partnership, and mutual respect. They had survived the hardships of the desert and the threats of the past, and in doing so, had discovered a life built on trust and freedom. One evening, as the stars sparkled above the desert, Nayeli reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the moments of fear, the times she had doubted herself, and the challenges she had faced. Yet through it all, she had grown stronger, more capable, and more confident. Thomas had been a steady presence, offering guidance and protection without ever taking control. He had treated her as an equal, respecting her choices and her autonomy. That respect had been more valuable than any safety he could provide. It had allowed her to reclaim her life and her voice. The following days brought more opportunities for growth and connection. Nayeli continued to explore the ranch, discovering hidden valleys and streams that provided fresh water for the animals. She learned to read the land, to understand the patterns of the wind, the movement of wildlife, and the subtle signs of weather changes. Each discovery reinforced her sense of independence and competence. Thomas joined her on these explorations, offering insight when needed but allowing her to take the lead. Their partnership had become seamless, a balance of strength, trust, and shared responsibility. Word of Nayeli's presence and the partnership she shared with Thomas had reached nearby communities, and some came to observe the life they had built. People were curious about the young Apache woman who had survived so much, and the rancher who had offered her safety without demanding control. Some questioned their choices, others admired the balance they had achieved. Nayeli felt a sense of pride in knowing that she had reclaimed her life and autonomy. She had faced adversity and emerged not as someone dependent, but as someone capable and respected. One day, while repairing a section of fencing damaged by recent rains, Nayeli paused to reflect on how far she had come. She remembered the day Thomas had found her, abandoned and weak in the desert. She had been afraid, uncertain, and wary of trusting anyone again. Now, months later, she moved with confidence, spoke with clarity, and made decisions that mattered. She realized that the life she now lived was defined by her own choices, guided by support rather than control. Thomas had given her more than safety, he had given her freedom. As the sun set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, Nayeli and Thomas prepared a meal together. They shared stories of the day, laughter mixing with quiet moments of reflection. Nayeli felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that her life was her own. She had built something meaningful. A safe, nurturing environment where she could thrive, learn, and grow. Thomas's respect and patience had been the foundation, but it was her own courage and determination that had brought her to this point. The final test of their partnership came when a neighboring rancher offered to buy some of their livestock, a potential opportunity but also a risk. Nayeli and Thomas discussed the offer, weighing the benefits and potential consequences. Nayeli spoke first, expressing her thoughts clearly and confidently. Thomas listened, offering guidance but never overriding her decision. In the end, they agreed together, a decision made through dialogue, respect, and shared understanding. Nayeli felt a deep sense of empowerment, knowing that her choices mattered and that Thomas valued her input equally. As night fell over the ranch, the stars blanketed the sky, and the desert became quiet once more. Nayeli and Thomas stood together, surveying the land they had tended, the work they had accomplished, and the life they had built. Nayeli felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the safety Thomas had provided, but for the freedom he had honored. She had survived hardship, reclaimed her strength, and learned that true partnership was not about control, but about trust, respect, and mutual support. Thomas, too, felt a quiet satisfaction. He had offered protection without domination, guidance without imposition, and care without expectation. Nayeli had grown into someone strong, independent, and confident, and he had witnessed her transformation without overshadowing it. Their bond had been tested by fear, challenge, and external pressures, and it had emerged stronger, enduring, and equal. Together they had built a life defined not by survival alone, but by trust, respect, and the quiet power of shared choice. In the days that followed, Nayeli continued to thrive, exploring new parts of the ranch, tending the animals, and nurturing the garden she had planted. Thomas supported her in every step, offering help when needed but never taking control. Their relationship was no longer defined by rescue or obligation but by equality, partnership, and shared responsibility. Nayeli understood that her life was her own, and Thomas understood that true care meant allowing her freedom while standing beside her. The Apache woman he had chosen to save, not control, had become a symbol of resilience, independence, and courage.
The ranch was no longer just a place of work. It was a home, a sanctuary where trust, respect, and choice defined every interaction.
Nayeli had reclaimed her life, and Thomas had learned that protection was most powerful when it honored the freedom and agency of the person being protected. Together they had created a story of survival, growth, and quiet triumph. A story not of domination or control, but of partnership, understanding, and the enduring strength of human connection. As the final rays of the sun disappeared behind the desert hills, Nayeli and Thomas stood side by side, gazing at the land they had nurtured and the life they had built. They did not need words to understand the journey they had shared. Every fence repaired, every animal guided, every storm weathered together was a testament to the power of trust, choice, and respect. Nayeli had chosen to stay, not because she was compelled, but because she wanted to. Thomas had chosen to protect without control, guiding without imposing. Their story had reached its natural, satisfying resolution, not in triumph over adversity alone, but in the creation of a life defined by equality, dignity, and mutual respect. The desert stretched endlessly before them, quiet, vast, and timeless. Nayeli breathed in the cool evening air, feeling safe, empowered, and alive. Thomas placed a steady hand on her shoulder, a gesture of connection and support. In that moment, they understood the true meaning of partnership, a bond built on choice, respect, and shared humanity. Their journey had been long and difficult, but it had led to something rare and enduring. A life lived together, side by side, defined not by fear or control, but by trust, love, and the quiet strength of two people who had chosen to walk the path together.